Good morning again. Good morning again. You can tell it's almost the end of the conference. Everybody just kind of keeps on talking. And okay, so we're in the stretch run here, and I hope you enjoyed the final round of breakout sessions. By the way, the feedback that I've heard along the way on our breakout sessions, the presenters, the material, the content has been steadily positive through yesterday and today. Hope you've enjoyed it and profited from it. As we get ready to wrap up the 2016 Safety and Workforce Summit, I can't think of a better way to do so than with a dynamic and diverse group of panelists joining us now. Optimism rarely dominates any discussion of the economy, especially during tough times like we're in right now. But we were able to start out yesterday with Ken Gronbach, who really did a very effective job at taking a different angle on the same picture, not just Wyoming, but nationally and literally globally, and deliver really a compelling message, I think a persuasive message that good news is coming. It's inevitable. And again, for those of us who've been in Wyoming for a long time, we know that this too shall pass. It's the key questions are, how do we navigate now? And how do we most effectively leverage advantage as we go forward? Today we're going to hear from a panel of experts who are going to walk us through the pieces of the economic puzzle, what's happening with the economy from the national perspective all the way to the local level. This panel is going to discuss what's ahead for Wyoming, the challenges, and how Wyoming can counter those challenges with our strengths. At this time, I'd like to welcome the panel. Thank you for being here. Look forward to hearing from you. And I'm going to ask Chairman Jim Engel to take care of the moderating. From here, it's your floor, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you to the panelists for joining us. You hear the word economics, and sometimes we all think maybe we shouldn't have ate so much for lunch, but it's going to be exciting. I had an opportunity to talk to each one of them individually. They solved all of our problems with what few problems maybe they even could find. So everything's going to be fine. So, and also I just want to do a little bit of a program note. It seems that we missed some of our very important council members. Not sure how that happened, but Brenda Burke with Sage Trucking is also supposed to be in the program, and Rocky Anderson with the Wyoming Electrical Apprenticeship. So apologies to those two council folks, but they're very important to the council as well. So at this time, we're going to move directly into our panel discussion. We have with us Dr. Roger Coupal. He's a professor and department head for the Agricultural and Applied Economic Development of the University of Wyoming. We have Bill Nye. He's a vice president for administration at the University of Wyoming. We have Dr. Ian Lange. He's the director of Mineral and Energy Economic Program, Colorado School of Mines, and Shawn Reese, chief executive officer for the Wyoming Business Council. Today we'll hear about the real challenges our economy and different sectors face. There's no question that there's incredible tough times ahead. I'm in the heart of where all of this is happening. I live right there in Campbell County. So sometimes I ask myself, is this the end of Wyoming? Well, you heard me remark last night, and from what I can tell, just being here with all of you and hearing all about the great things that our partners in business, education, workforce training, and safety have going on, and the answer I can definitely say is no. Wyoming will be here, will continue to be a strong state and a strong influence on the nation. Based on the discussions we've held over the past few days, day and a half, I've never been more enthusiastic to tackle what's ahead. Today we'll hear from the realistic perspectives from our experts on what's going on in our economy. Obviously, it's not all roses, but in order to effectively solve the issues we're facing, we need to hear the hard stuff as well, and then make a plan. Today we'll discuss thoughts and ideas about how Wyoming's communities and individuals can face the challenges ahead, how to face the challenges head on and not back off. At this point, each panelist will provide about 10-minute discussion. Then we will have some time of group discussion among the panelists. If somebody comes up with a question in the audience, it's a very good question and you're dying to ask it, feel free to do so. We'll do that at the very end. Our first presenter is going to be Dr. Coupal. He is a professor and the current department head for the Agriculture and Applied Economics Department at the University of Wyoming. Dr. Coupal Started at the University of Wyoming in 1997 as a community development specialist with a research and extension appointment. He received his PhD in agricultural economics from Washington State University in 1997. He does work within the nexus of community development and natural resources policies. He has worked on initiatives related to state and local impact of energy and tourism development, electrically modeling for the Rocky Mountain power grid, as well as past work on the electrical policy in Washington State. The economics of reclamation and restoration of disturbed lands from resource development and local state government financial planning. Dr. Coupal, thank you for joining us, and you now can start your 10-minute brief.
So, thank you. I'm going to move it a little bit farther so I can make sure I don't lose my place in there. I spent the last a decade and a half looking at how communities deal with the nexus of energy development or resource development and resource use and community economic development, and it's always a struggle. Sometimes if you kind of take a look at that little picture of the cows up there with their backsides, looking at us, sometimes we kind of feel that way. Okay, we kind of feel that way, and in reality, we have some real possible good possibilities. So what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about overall issues going on in terms of the relationship between the national economy and Wyoming, and then get into sort of human enterprise capital trends and with some conclusions. So first of all, for national trends, you kind of look at where that upper left hand is the national GDP, and right in the middle of it, of course, is the Great Recession. When you start looking at that, the yellow line is actually real dollars. It doesn't look like a lot, but what's kind of interesting about. Oh, sorry. Is that better? Sorry. Okay. Yeah. I keep looking over this way and I keep moving off. And so while the recession viewed from the national sense is a short a few months, in reality it tends to linger. Most people don't view the recession that way. We view it as a lot, 4 years and 3 years or something like that. And so the way we feel about it is lagged for quite a while afterwards. You kind of look at some of the stuff that Jim Robinson does, the Division of Economic Analysis. I've got there in terms of Wyoming, and you kind of see it's very easy to see the big recession, and then we started to climb out of it, and that's all great. And then just recently, of course, we saw a big decline, and I always have to put in Dr. Paul Samuelson's Nobel laureate quote about some of these things, where he says that stock markets have predicted 12 out of the last 3 recessions. So we're really not sure about what's going on a lot of times. Our economy, as you know better than me probably, is built on a natural resource base, and a lot about the big boom we had in the past 10 years is about gas production. So I put this up primarily just to show you an important issue, and that is that the thin thing on top is everybody else, including us. Okay, the amount of gas that Marcellus and some of these others will be producing suggests that prices are going to be relatively low for a long time, and they're going to be competitive. It's going to be an issue of competition with coal and too, and so it's always going to be an issue. Coal production also actually went up during the boom, which is what we expected, but it stayed pretty stable. Keep in mind, about 94% or 90 something like that of the coal produced in this state is exported to utilities all over the country. So that's an important stable source of income that we have, and now with coal prices at rock bottom, primarily because gas prices are at rock bottom, we're having issues Bill Mike can talk about better than I. Uh, we did some work on, just to give you a sense, though, we did some work on the Clean Power Plan, and this what the panel on the right on the right to show is that the blue is the reference, but then you have the two scenarios that the Energy Information Agency gave us, and one of them shows a pretty substantial decline in production. The other one is less. It's still a decline, but it's not near as bad. But what's kind of interesting to me was when we did the analysis that the employment could still go up. Even with the Clean Power Plan, there's an important future for coal, Powder River Basin coal in particular, because it's inexpensive and it's low sulfur. Another part that I always have to put up, that we always have to remember, is that is a part of, we have the commodity side of things. We also have the tourism side of things. And these are the growth and visitation both in Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Park. And they've been growing at a pretty impressive rate in the past years. Even during the recession, there was a little bit of a flat, but it really wasn't much, and they just kept growing. Now, on a annual jobs per income basis, keep track of my time. The tourism jobs can't compare with coal jobs and things like that, but nonetheless, it's still growing, and it's important as a diversification of our issue in our economy. What I wanted to show you real quickly now is this thing. Those of you that play in the stock market have heard this leading, slipping, gaining, and lagging in terms of stocks. Well, you can kind of see this in with states too. This little panel here, and the red is where we are. We're in the slipping part, where we're above the national average in the long term, but below the national average growth and industry earnings in the short run. And so, which is not bad. That's what we'd expect, and so that's fine. I won't go into real detail, but into who we're there with, but you can kind of get a sense of that in terms of the leading and the slipping. A lot of the energy dependent states are in that, and a lot of these diversified economies are in the leading. That's to be expected on the backside of a boom. There's nothing particularly wrong with that. It's just it's a good way of pointing where we probably need to go. Finally, I wanted to cover just briefly I'm trying to keep time for okay. Another aspect, and that is closing and new startup for plants in Wyoming versus the national economy. So on the panel on the right side, the blue is the U.S. and the red or the yellow is us. And you can see in terms of plant closings, of course, it's the backside of the boom. We have a substantially higher rate. It's about a 15% higher rate of plant closings in our state, while in terms of the plant openings, the other panel on this is the left side, and the right side is the plant openings. On the right side, we tend to follow what happens. It's very much more variable. We tend to follow what happens in the nation as a whole, and so it does suggest where we probably as a state ought to start thinking about what to do and how to maintain economic development. What does all this tell us? And again, it's a real quick, because these guys are going to talk a little more detail, but a lot of what's going on is structural. We think in terms of boom and bust as a cycle, and there's a cyclical aspect about it. But with the growth in natural gas reserves nationally and actually internationally, because Canada's got quite considerable too, it may be a long time before we go back to the old days when gas was very high. Unfortunately, it means that we need to focus on diversification of the economy, and as well as our state and local government, especially local government revenues, some way and somehow. There are resources, and we'll talk about some, and I think Shawn will talk about some too. But the Business Council is critical in that effort. Small business development centers, the manufacturing works, of course, UW and UW Extension has programs on this, and then last but certainly not least, the community colleges. So we need to work with all these groups to identify those issues. The long-term strategies, diversification, first of all, does not mean we let go of our traditional resource base. We need that, and we'll continue to need that. And even the evidence from the Clean Power Plan analysis suggests that it will be. Sorry. There. The evidence suggests that Powder River Basin coal will be in our future for a long time. We need to think in terms of also about the entrepreneurial education and assistance that we can give to new entrepreneurs, and this includes the micro enterprise. You know, that the individual that sets up an espresso place to a small and medium-sized enterprise like Tri-Hydro. These are critical parts of our employment base. They're growing parts of our employment base. That requires, of course, you know, that our high school and our colleges start focusing on entrepreneurialism and in a more formal way, and that's always a difficult thing. And we need to think in terms of about the issue of the public infrastructure, making sure, because businesses have a hard time maintaining a rate of return if they have to pay for problems with water and sewer and roads and everything else. So that's a real short overview of what I see as the link between the nation and what we're doing. That's it.
No doom and gloom there. Thank you so much, Dr. Coupal. Next, we have Dr. Ian Lange. He's the director of the Mineral and Energy Economics Program in a division of the Economics and Business at the Colorado School of Mines. Dr. Lange's previous appointments have been at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the University of Stirling in Scotland. While at the Environmental Protection Agency, he advised the policy offices and rulemaking related to the power plants, refineries, and greenhouse gas legislation. During his time at the University of Stirling, Dr. Lange directed the Masters of Energy Management program, which led to interactions with a number of private energy sector entities. He received his bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Illinois, Chicago, and a PhD in economics from the University of Washington. Dr. Lange, thank you for joining us to share your energy expertise and your 10 minutes of wisdom.
Thank you. Yeah. It's always weird. I always thought there was only one UW, but okay, there's two. And I'm trying to get used to that. My colleagues here from the other UW. But anyways, so my first love was always coal. And it's been great sort of traveling around the world to talk about coal. People always know about the Powder River Basin and talk about how that's a top 2 mine in the world. As I talked about, right, there's lots of headwinds facing the coal industry. Roger brought up a couple of them with natural gas prices. I won't reiterate some of those issues, but I will say I don't expect much relief from the export terminals that'll be opening up either in the Gulf Coast or elsewhere in the U.S. So demand for natural gas sort of worldwide is certainly lagging in Europe. There is obviously demand out in the Pacific area. So the prices sort of that you could get by taking that natural gas from the U.S., freezing it, putting it on the boat, traveling it to wherever it needs to be, you're about breaking even there. And so I wouldn't expect the price to move up too much here as we start to export more for natural gas, and then so provide some relief to the coal industry. The other thing that's sort of hurting natural gas prices worldwide, just big fines, lots of places, right? So Eastern Med, there's a lot of natural gas fines. There's a lot of natural gas coming online. East Africa, there's a lot of natural gas fines, a lot of natural gas coming online. You're just not going to see that there's a sort of shortage of natural gas around the world, and that's going to keep sort of prices here in the U.S., relatively low. And natural gas is the main competitor for coal in the electricity generation sector. The other thing clearly is price of renewables. They're coming down drastically. Most utilities around the United States, if they're investing in anything, they're investing in renewables. So those are also going to hurt in terms of taking up some production where a coal-fired power plant would have done that production. Lastly, electricity demand has just been pretty flat or somewhat negative, right? So nobody expects demand for electricity in the US to be going up at any substantial rate in the near future. It's just going to be pretty flat. That also just hits the market for electricity, which is again the main consumer of coal. So domestically, the market looks somewhat limited by, say, natural gas, renewables, not changes in electricity demand. Well, let's look elsewhere, right? The Pacific market, I think, is where most people are looking. Seems that the Chinese government is following through on some of its promises to basically clean up its air. They're not building as many coal-fired power plants or buying as much coal sort of from the Pacific market, or they're not importing as much coal as people have been expecting. So most people are looking to India. India looks like the next place you could be selling a decent amount of coal to. Obviously Wyoming, if we didn't have sort of some of those states just to the west of us, we'd be right on the coast. But unfortunately, we have to get the coal from here on train to a port, and then from the port off to the Pacific market. And that's where, so far, from what my understanding is, we run into some issues, right? So the rail network's pretty congested. The ports aren't necessarily excited about expanding, right? So I know the state of Utah was going to offer up the Oakland port. I think it was $53 million a loan to expand their coal export terminal. They did actually expand the coal export terminal up in Vancouver. So I know some of the PRB coal goes up into Canada and it gets exported through there. But it doesn't look like many of the coal export terminals on the West Coast are interested in expanding. Sort of politically, those states aren't interested in sort of making that possible. The Atlantic market is mostly being, Atlantic market might mostly be covered by coal mines out in Appalachia. If you're trying to get to the Atlantic market, you'd obviously have to take the coal by rail over to Virginia or to Louisiana or something like that to get it on a port to get it over to the Atlantic market. And then the Appalachian coal mines have that advantage there. So I don't see the Atlantic market being a place that Wyoming could be sort of exporting coal. It's probably going to be in the Pacific market and probably to some place like India. Unfortunately, obviously India is a little further, west, east, a little further away, than China. So the coal has to traveling farther, making it a little more expensive. And then again, you run into problems so Australia is a big coal exporter in that area. Indonesia has been a big coal exporter in the area, and they're much closer geographically. So there's possibilities in the export market. It's just, there's also some questions there, I would say. Now, to bring a little more closer to home, what I understand the legislature and the political regime here have been thinking about is investing heavily in carbon utilization technologies such that there'll be demand for things like coal, natural gas, and oil, such that they can capture the carbon. You basically sell them the carbon twice, right? You sell them the coal, and then you grab that carbon, and you sell that on again to somebody else. This makes a lot of sense. I think you have sort of a world-class university like UW that I'm sure happy to take some money to think about carbon capture and utilization, or carbon capture and utilization. And it depends on how you look at sort of what's recently been happening with CCS, or carbon capture and utilization. So most everywhere I've been, or everything I've read, it's been, everyone says, we'll probably lose money on this, but we might be the first to do it. And then after they start putting it in, they say, we lost a lot more money than we thought. Oh my God, right? So initially you thought maybe a 30% hit on your productivity in producing electricity, and it ends up being 50%. Initially you think maybe you can turn your boiler on and off because you don't want to produce electricity, it's not worthwhile, but no, the CCS needs to run all the time. So not only are you losing money, are you losing efficiency by by having that process that pulls the carbon out. Now you got to run your plant when it's not profitable to run it, right? So there's a lot of big dings on the CCS side of things. However, this generally just makes me think that, right, that means there's opportunities, right? So there's a lot of people interested in CCS. There's a lot of people interested in capturing that CO2 and using it for enhanced oil recovery, enhanced gas recovery around the world. But nobody's sort of perfected how to make it work. Everybody so far has just, I don't want to say hit walls, but said, ooh, that was a bad idea. Why did we do that, right? And so hopefully with improvements in that, there can be some sort of spark, some sort of innovation in terms of this could be the epicenter of where CCS technology comes from, and that would lead to then sort of, a bigger boom for the other parts of the Wyoming economy. So again, just because, say, the plant down in Texas is probably going to get its DOE funding pulled, doesn't mean that's, this thing's doomed. It just means that there's opportunity for someone in come and do it better. Because if Texas was doing it best, then there wouldn't be room for someone to move into there. Now I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Lange. It was very informative and very positive, actually, speaking about the great coal and some of the things that we have here in Wyoming. Next, we will go to Bill Mai. Bill graduated from the University of Wyoming with a BS in 1987 and an MBA in 1989. He served as manager of the Budget and Finance Division of the Legislative Service Office and administrator of the state's Economic Analysis Division. Bill has served as co-chairman of the Consensus Revenue Estimating Group, the team charged with forecasting the state's government revenue and earnings, and he is the lead staff for the legislator's powerful Joint Appropriations Committee. He was also the senior economic advisor to Governor Matt Mead. In November 2013, Bill Mai accepted the position as the Vice President for Administration for the University of Wyoming. Bill, thank you for joining us to share your diverse expertise on the inner workings of the Wyoming State's government's finance.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate the chance to be here. I wish we were all here to talk about better news. And I think this first slide is pretty indicative of what's going on in the state. I think state government is a pretty good indicator for what's going on in the rest of the state, frankly. Our revenue stream is so focused and so dependent on the minerals industry here. It presents both opportunities and then the opposite. It presents some challenges at times, and we're at one of those challenging times. And so when I was invited to speak here, I thought, there's so much you could speak about. Where do you go? Where do you start? And really, I think for me, being involved in the Consensus Revenue Estimating Group as long as I have, probably the thing that makes the most sense is just to talk about revenues and probably a little bit about expenditures and how do we find ourselves as a state needing to cut $100 million from our Department of Health 2 months after the legislative session ended? How do we find ourselves having to cut another $35 million from the University of Wyoming for the biennial budget 2 or 3 months after the legislative session just ended? And those are legitimate questions to ask, and they're tough questions to answer, especially when the light's shining on that Craig group. And frankly, I'm pretty happy not to be a co-chair of it anymore, but I am still a member of it. And I think that's probably the relevance I bring to this discussion. So what happened, I think you can see a little bit in this graph, and then there'll be an additional graph that lays it out a little bit further. But what I would say is focus on what the red and the green represent here are the state's general fund and the state's budget reserve account, which are the two primary spending accounts that the state operates out of. There are lots of other revenue sources out there, lots of other accounts, so I don't want to characterize this as this is it. But these are really good indicators because they capture the majority of revenues beyond a certain level. So for this discussion, I think it's particularly pertinent in that when you get beyond some base level of revenue that gets distributed, everything extra gets split between that budget reserve account and school foundation program, the other big eater in the state, I'll put it that way. So if you take a look going back, at the beginning of the graph there, that dotted line represents the state's standard budget level. And the standard budget is, for those of you who don't track it and probably won't track it after this discussion, the standard budget basically represents the base to continue state government operations and funding of local governments and funding of all these external entities that state government provides funding to through the legislature and frankly through the governor's budgeting process. So if you go back to 2005, things looked pretty swell at that point, and there was quite a bit of excess money. Well, that continued all the way up through 15. And so people wonder, well, how are you guys building all these schools? How are you building all these buildings at community colleges, at the University of Wyoming? How'd you stuff all that money into the LSRA? How'd you put all that extra money into the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund? How have you funded local governments to the levels that you've funded them? How have you paid for road projects? That's it. It's the difference between that standard budget line and the top line of total revenues. And where we find ourselves right now is where the heavy line draws up and down on that chart. And that really started with the beginning of FY16, as you can see there. To the right of that line, those revenues are projected revenues. To the left of the line, they are actual revenues. In the past, projected revenues would have been a little bit lower than what you're seeing for actual. Craig actually hits pretty close to the actual. The latest projection hits pretty close to the actual, typically. We had a few years recently where there were some extraordinary investment earnings that showed up. And frankly, a lot of those got put into the LSRA. And I'll bet a lot of people right now are breathing a bit of a sigh of relief that occurred, because there currently sits about $1.8 or $1.6 billion in that reserve account. And it should be possible to weather this storm for a while. It all depends, as the other panelists have said here, how long this lasts. So I'll take you to the next slide, hopefully. And what that will show you is the January 14 Craig projection for the 17-18 biennium versus the January 16 projection for the 17-18 biennium. The first set of bars represents oil valuation, or oil valuation. These are assessed valuations. Again, it's an indicator of how much taxes you're going to raise and what the economic activity is expected to be. And you can see in every case, oil, gas, coal, each one of them is down. Coal is down a little, oil and gas are down a lot, and the minerals total is way down. And what that represents then, going to the right, Dr. Coupal kind of touched on this. If you look back to about 2005, 2006, again, these are total valuations by mineral type and then by other property category. What you'll see is about 2004, 5, 6, right in there, that green part of that bar grows immensely. And the state's revenues really grew on that natural gas valuation. As that started to shrink in 11 and 12, oil picked up the difference. And really, you still had these pretty magnificent revenue streams coming into this state, and the ability, again, to build these $100 million buildings or make these $500 million deposits into the LSRA. It really was a pretty unique situation. At the same time, state government and the cost of all government, including local governments and K-12 education, continue to grow. So salaries grow, benefits costs grow, and in Wyoming, we've gotten pretty used to having really healthy benefits packages here. We continue to build roads. We continue to build infrastructure with local governments. And what we're finding now is I'm going to take you back to that slide. What's under that current set of revenue projections, that cushion's all gone. And more concerning than that is the fact that now you expect revenues to be lower than your standard budget. And that's a problem. And that's why you have people making massive cuts in the summer immediately following a legislative budget session. And I understand I have 2 minutes left to go, so I will try to shorten this up and say the big questions are, when does it come back? We don't know. I don't think it goes completely away. I think we should be able to maintain somewhere in that ballpark, and maybe you can right size your expenditures to fit. But when does it come back to pre-15? Who knows at this point? It's kind of the trifecta that we have working against us right now. If it doesn't come back, what supplants that revenue? And that's the $1 million question, or $1 billion question, really. As Dr. Coupal says, tourism doesn't pay what coal mining does. And frankly, it's pretty concentrated in one part of the state. So that's a challenge as well. And then I guess my last question for everybody here, and I think it's going to feed into this panel discussion, is how long can you prop things up with the LSRA? Because there's a lot of pressure right now to spend that reserve account. And the question is, that's what it's set up for, but how, if it takes a while to come back, how do you figure out what the appropriate supplementing of the revenue stream is from that account, because it is limited. So with that, I will cut it off and allow it to go to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Our next presenter will be Shawn Reese. Shawn rejoined the Wyoming Business Council as CEO in June of 2014. He previously worked at the Business Council from 2003 to 2011, where there he developed the Business Ready Community program that we're all familiar with, and oversaw the operations of the Investment Ready Communities division. Prior to returning to the Business Council, Reese oversaw a staff of advisors and analysts serving Governor Matt Mead on a range of energy and natural resource issues. He was the lead architect of Mead's energy strategy. Leading the charge was the theme. Reese helped to develop energy plans and policies with the Western Governors Association and the Republican Governors Public Policy Committee. He served on the Staff Advisory Council of the Western Governors Association. He also was the staff chairman of the Multi-State Greater Sage Grouse Task Force. Reese received a Bachelor's of Science degree and performed matters coursework in planning at the University of Wyoming. Reese is a Cheyenne native. He and his wife, Amy, have 2 children, Clara and Owen. Thank you, Shawn, for sharing what the efforts of the Business Council and its partners are taking part in.
Thank you, Jim. Good afternoon, everyone. So I have been in this position now for 2 years and 2 weeks. And when I first started, you can kind of get the sense that the economy was changing. Not only was the economy beginning to show signs of change that no one could have anticipated how quickly, we were also going through some organizational changes at the Business Council. And so early on, I consulted with Dr. Coupal's boss, Dean Gailey at the College of Ag at the university, who thinks a lot about managing change. And he talked about these paradoxes of change. And he had a really cool list of about 10 things. One of them is you want to look forward, but you've got to look back. You want to go fast, but you got to slow down. You want to have the big picture, but you can't lose sight of the details, and so forth. So I've kind of applied those paradoxes to the organization, but also thinking about Wyoming's economy. So we want to be looking forward, but let's take a little look back. And I reflect personally how Wyoming's economy has shaped me in my generation. So I graduated from Cheyenne Central, 1990. The economy then was much like it is today. Although I would say the difference then is that there seemed to be, at least from my perspective as a graduating high schooler, this real sense of pessimism and defeatism, and this is just the way it is, and we'll just weather the storm. Well, for my classmates, weathering the storm was not an option, and those who were more ambitious than me left the state. I would characterize my staying here as probably more laziness than anything. But I would say about 2/3 of my graduating high school class left the state of Wyoming after they graduated. Most have not come back. That same year, 1990, when I graduated, the business community got together and said, we have to stop this trajectory. We cannot continue to have this mass exodus of our youth. Our neighboring states, their personal income is going through the roof. They're diversifying their economies. We've got to do something different. So that discussion started the planning and the discussions that ultimately, maybe 8 years later, led to the formation of the Business Council. But that group of business leaders, they really in 1990 said three things. One, we've got to continue to invest in ourselves. Well, basically, they didn't say we've got to continue. They said we have to invest in ourselves. And at that time, there had not been the same investment in workforce development, in infrastructure, in our education, our people, our communities. They also said we've got to think differently about economic development. Instead of, programs scattered across state agencies, it's all got to live under one roof where people talk to each other. And not only do we have to think differently about economic development and invest in ourselves, it's got to be a public and a private priority. So those three philosophies carry forward today. And circumstances are very similar, although there are some big differences. So that's my quick look back. My look forward is this. My look forward is that Wyoming is prosperous and our economies are strong and diverse and expanding. Small business is a big deal. That Wyoming is a high plains of technology development. That our communities have everything that they need. That Wyoming knows no bounds. That's a vision for 10 years down the road. We're not entirely there yet, but that's what things look like from the Business Council lens 10 years down the road. We've got a stretch goal of outpacing the nation's gross domestic product by a factor of 2 over a 10-year period. The ways in which we approach increasing Wyoming's prosperity and prosperity for industries and businesses and communities and families and people is a collection of building blocks that shape roughly like a pyramid. At the base of that set of building blocks is leadership and public policy. Leadership, to me, means a lot of things. It means having champions. It means having strong partnerships. It means having the right organizational structure to get things done. And public policy means the regulations that are conducive to business and industrial development, the tax policy, streamlining of red tape. Above leadership and public policy are the building blocks of infrastructure, quality of life in our communities, and very importantly, workforce. And workforce, I'll say very broadly, is not just the workforce and the skills that we need here and now, but the skills that we're going to need 20 years down the road. And frankly, those are skills that we don't even know what are going to be necessary. So it's workforce and it's education combined. On top of that tier is entrepreneurial development, existing business expansion and retention, and then finally, business recruitment, which when people hear economic development, most often they think about business recruitment. It's the sexy piece of economic development. It's the headline grabber, but frankly, it's the piece that happens least often, and all the other building blocks need to be playing together for us to even be positioning ourselves to bring new businesses into the state. So those are the building blocks. The actual strategies that we have to outpace the nation's GDP, to increase Wyoming's prosperity, to realize all those visions down the road are 5 things. Think big, think small, think new, think local, and think global. Think big is industrial development. And with industrial development, we see really 2 sides to that coin. The first side is that we've got to have industry-ready communities and regions. We also need to be adding value to our natural resources, coal and carbon, CO2, natural gas, helium, uranium, agriculture. Think small is small business development. And we've got a list of the business types. Many of those are represented in this room that have the most bang for the buck in the economy. They may not create the most jobs, but they're well-paying jobs, require a lot of skills, and they have a multiplier effect in the economy. Those are the businesses that we want to strengthen and grow. Think new. Governor Mead's made technology the 4th largest economic sector as one of his ambitions. It's achievable, but we need broadband across the state. We've done a lot with broadband, but there's a lot of communities that are still underserved. And along with the broadband, we need to have the innovators, the entrepreneurs who are doing new things and developing new technologies. Think local is our community development, and part of our plan is to increase local sales tax collections. We need to pull more people off the interstate. We need to strengthen Main Street, give communities all of those attributes that we see in other states that will lead to recruiting, retaining workforce and businesses. And finally, if we think local, then we need to think global. And for me, global means anything outside of our state boundaries. But we have opportunity to expand our market share nationally and internationally. And part of that means connecting businesses with new markets. It means training businesses how to become more export ready. It means talking to other companies, corporations, and say, hey, Wyoming is a place for you to invest. We have this incredible resource base. We want you to add value here. This is the place where you can realize a return. This is the place where you've got a workforce that's got a strong ethic. This is the place to do business. So think big, think small, think new, think local, think global. We apply all of those building blocks to each of those strategies. And the goal is Wyoming's prosperity is going to increase, and Wyoming will continue to be a leader in a number of areas. To do this, we've got to continue to invest in ourselves. We've got to think we've got to think new about economic development. Economic development has got to be a public and a private priority. If it's perceived to be a government program, it's the kiss of death for us. And then I'll add one more. We cannot get down on ourselves. We cannot lose hope. We've got to remain optimistic, and it's got to be a can-do attitude. Sure, we've been through this before, but this time we've been working quite a bit over the past 15 years or so. We're in a much better place than we ever have been under these circumstances, and this is an opportunity, I say, that I think we should seize and make the most of, like we haven't done before. So thanks.
Thank you, Shawn. Those are some great building blocks and a good way to look at things for our great state. Next, I've got questions, and I'm going to actually ask or address each panelist, give a number of them an opportunity to reply to the question. We'll start with Dr. Lange. First question for you, Dr. Lange, is what's next for the Wyoming economy?
Well, we'll say probably continued stagnate. Well, I don't know what the word is, stagnation. Stagnation in coal use across the U.S. And so that's going to have to, it's like they're going to have to diversify, sort of as Shawn's talked about. And I sort of think that again, sort of through the either carbonization or through this entrepreneurial spirit things, there's going to be new things coming in and new things that are going to make up that, if not the base, then the next part above the base in the pyramid. I mean, I can remember, although I really enjoyed living in the UK, there was such a sense of fear of failure that nobody tried things. And it was really frustrating and also really welcoming to think, okay, I didn't grow up in a place where I was sort of taught to be so scared of failure that I can't try something. And so I think, encouraging people that, if you think you have a good idea, go out and try to make it happen. Whether there needs to be different kind of bankruptcy policies, this is sort of outside of my thought process, but, you can't be so afraid to fail that you don't try anything, because then nothing ever happens.
Thank you. Bill, same question to you. What's next for the Wyoming economy?
It's a very good question. First of all, I think it'd be a big mistake to count out the minerals industry in this state, and to think that this blip downward is the end of the state or even close to it. I think the infrastructure that's been put in place in the state in the last decade at least provides us this great base. And as an example, the anchor that building that NCAR facility here provided to attract Microsoft and others, to me, that's the kind of building block we need to look at. That's the kind of investment we need to look at. And it doesn't always end up being a private partnership that gets it started. That was with a federal government partnership, perish the thought. But look at the effect that it had for Cheyenne in bringing some really nice high-paying jobs and high-tech jobs. Just exactly the kind of industry I think that will help balance things out for us. I think more of those opportunities need to be explored. And, in Laramie, for example, the UL partnership that's going into that Cirrus Sky business park out there, again, exactly the kind of thing we need to look at for diversification.
Great, thank you. Dr. Coupal.
Well, to kind of follow along both of what these guys have said, I think a lot of this in the future will require that we look at building new ideas and new firms and new industries across the state. I mean, we have the entrepreneurial capacity to do that, and we just need to have both the community support as well as the state support. Sociologists that I've worked with over the years argue that the entrepreneurial development doesn't occur well without local community support, and that support could be just social and political as well as financial. But you need that, and this is a good time. Schumpeter used to call it, economist by the name of Schumpeter called it creative destruction. We want to make sure it's not just destruction, I guess, but creative. What comes up behind this downturn is our new ideas and new firms. And Bill's right. I don't see the traditional economic basis going away here. It may not be quite as vibrant, and the booms may not be quite as big, especially on the gas side of things, but it's still going to be an important part of our economic base, and actually can potentially, and has been in the past, driven innovations and entrepreneurial development itself. I mean, look at hydraulic fracturing. We sort of tested it, we being Wyoming and Colorado, tested it and showed that it could work, and now, unfortunately, it's working all over the place and less here, but nonetheless, it does give you a sense of what can happen when you start trying to innovate and support that innovation.
Great, thank you. Shawn, this question's for you. What can Wyoming communities do to address these current and future challenges?
Well, thanks for the question, Jim. A couple things, some of which I mentioned. Number one is that we've got to get the private sector and the public sector jointly rallied and make economic development a priority. Too often I see local economic development efforts perceived as a government function, and we've really got to get the business leaders of the community rallying behind making economic development a priority. We've also have to develop the next generation of champions in our communities. It's champions across the state of Wyoming who have done incredible things in their communities. Example after example of one or two individuals who have taken the bull by the horns, thought entrepreneurial, and made things happen. Often these are business leaders, men and women, we've got to be developing that next generation of champion. And I think we need to be doing more to listen to the next generation of Wyoming's workforce of leaders and get them to be more positioned in leadership roles to serve as an inspiration for us, but also start lining things up for the next generation. So I think developing champions, reminding folks that economic development doesn't happen unless you've got that joint priority, and again, thinking new about the way we do things and continuing to invest in ourselves, as difficult as it's going to continue to be. Investing in workforce, investing in infrastructure. We're going to have to be more creative about it. It's not going to be as easy, but we've got to keep investing in ourselves.
Thank you, Shawn. This next question will be for Dr. Lange. What can the people of Wyoming as a whole do to be more proactive in these challenging economic times?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is definitely a tough one, right? Because if we all knew what was going to lead to success, right, we would have already done it. And so I really think, like I said, just this fear, you have to overcome this fear of failure. You have to overcome this idea that you don't want to try something because it might be sticking your neck out and it might be something that, doesn't work out. But you'll learn from things that you do, learn from your mistakes, and then go out and get better next time.
Perfect, thank you. Bill, we're going to go to you with a little bit more of a twist on the same question. What can we do where you're more involved on the legislative side, or were? What can we do? A lot of us folks are private sector people. What can we do to influence policy changes or tax changes that could be made at a state government level to be more proactive with what's ahead?
Well, it's been said before, but Wyoming's tax base probably needs to be diversified, and those of us who are left in this state after after minerals declines probably aren't maybe so receptive to those tax increases, but they may be necessary to do exactly what Shawn and Ian are talking about here, and that is continuing to invest in the infrastructure that's necessary. If you have the place set up and it's ready to go, people will come here. I'm convinced. It's a good state. I think everybody here believes that, and that's why they're here. But you got to continue to invest in your kids too, and provide that higher education component to where you do have the right workforce here to attract the right kinds of people. And I think you have a very receptive legislature. You have an extremely receptive governor to ensure that all of those things happen.
Perfect, thank you. Shawn, did you have anything you'd like to add to that?
I think it's important to, I often get, so what are we doing to diversify the economy? And I always say, I did get that memo. But adding more businesses to the mix is a different piece of the puzzle than diversifying the tax base. So we can bring in so many different types of businesses across the state, which is a challenge in a very rural state like ours. But even if we were diversified in terms of businesses till the cows came home, the state revenue picture isn't going to be much different than it is now. And that's a more difficult discussion, but it's a discussion that needs to be had. And I park that under that building block of leadership and public policy.
Thank you, Shawn. Dr. Coupal, do you have anything else to add?
Just to kind of reiterate some of the points that have already been said, but I think we have to think of economic development as not as a stock of what we've got, but as a flow. You've got firms and labor moving in, firms and labor moving out, and so we always have to keep working on it. And it is important to do this at the local level. That's really where it works, as it is to make sure that the state level, like the Business Council and others, are working and bring in, like Shawn was saying, the community colleges are vital to that. UW, I think, is too. It's a group effort, but it starts at the local.
Thank you so much. It was a very great panel. Is there any dying questions from anyone in the crowd? Okay, with that, I very much appreciate all the great insight and the knowledge. We have a gift for each of our panelists. It's the Wyoming logoed Looks like it's sweat drip catchers or the cup, I'm not sure which, coasters. I know I never use them and get in trouble at home for not using them, but thank you so much to our panelists, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thanks again to the panel. You know, one of the things that that occurred to me as I was listening here to the discussion, it brought to memory a conversation that I had. One of my youngest daughter was in a one-year internship just outside of Calgary, Alberta, years ago, and I was talking to some Calgarians up there during a visit. And we got to talking about politics in the U.S., politics in Canada, and I suppose I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was intrigued to find out that the East-West sort of mindsets that we think of here in the U.S. were really mirrored in Canada, and the regional mindsets as well. And one of the very interesting comments that this 3 or 4 people that I was having a conversation with made was that these folks are from Alberta, and they're commenting on the East Coast, the Montreal, the Ottawa, the BC and Calgary sort of attitudes and how those things differ. And then they started talking about regional mindsets, and they picked on one of their neighboring provinces to the east, and they characterized that province as having a nickname of the Gap. And it was not a compliment. It was one of those, and I asked them to explain to me what they're talking about, and they said, well, you have progressives in the east, you've got a very progressive attitude in the west, and out here in the middle, in a very rural province, you've got kind of a long-lasting characteristic that led to this nickname, and it was an impression from a distance, so it may not have been fair. But the idea was that there was such a resistance to change and such a resistance to forward thinking and forward leaning and forward looking that it was perceived, at least from a neighboring perspective, as holding that place back. One of the things that I've been able to observe over the last decades in Wyoming is that I don't know if Wyoming would have ever been accused of being the Gap. But one thing I can tell you is that I sure have been pleased to see over the last 10, 15 years the kind of thinkers that have been speaking into the life of Wyoming, that have been part of the life of Wyoming, that have really led to a progressive attitude. When we face times like this, it really leads to, okay, we've seen this before, how do we adapt to this, and now what are we going to do about it? And so I want to say thanks again to the panel, because I really think that you reaffirm that sort of attitude and forward-leaning mentality that we need so desperately, and we're beginning to enjoy in this state. I do believe that the future is bright. I do believe it's going to call on the gifts and the talents and the training and the expertise and education of every single person in this room and all who are in here during the past couple of days. We have, I want to say thanks to a couple of people, but we've got a drawing here in just a second, which I think some of the remaining folks have been maybe anticipating along the way. There was a vendor drawing a little bit earlier, and there is a Cedars Health gift basket, and the winner is Deanna Crofts. And so you need to pick that up at the Cedars Health booth. And now this is my real role for this entire session. Okay. So the winner of the vendor passport drawing is Reed Avizian. Reed, are you here? Winner has to be present. Sorry, dude. Joni Hafner. Joni, are you here? Let that be a lesson to you. Fryn Lamb. Preston Nelson. For the rest of you, your chances are growing by the odds are getting better. How about Dave Nickerson? Dave loses. Tanya and Clavel from IBMC. Okay. Bill might, no, sorry. Susie Doremus. Susie, are you here? Okay. Congratulations for outlasting the rest of them, Susie. I want to thank all of you so much for joining us at the 2016 Wyoming Safety and Workforce Summit. I've got a list of names here, but I'm not going to read them. There's a long list of people who were on the planning team for this summit this year, which I would consider already to be a resounding success. We're going to do an online evaluation that we invite you to take part in and let us know how we can improve it for this time next year. But I would like to ask everybody who is still standing or still here in the room from the Department of Workforce Services, would you stand up for just a second and let us say thank you for all the work that you've done? Everybody. And I want to say a final thank you to the presenters, the sponsors, the vendors, to Chairman Engel and the council, and we are adjourned for the year. Thank you.
Time was on my side when I was running down the street. It was a bang, bang, bang. Shaking down an old guitar and something you'd occupy my mind, mind, mind. Yes, he was born to realize.